Power. It's the drug every dictator craves. And few rulers in Africa abused it more than Jean-Bédel Bokassa, a man who crowned himself emperor, built a throne of gold, and turned his country into a circus of brutality and excess. But before the crown, before the madness, before the massacres, Bokassa was just a soldier, a French soldier. Born in 1921 in a small Central African village, he grew up under colonial rule. Tragedy struck early. Bokassa lost his father at a young age, and later claimed that France's President Charles de Gaulle became a father figure to him. That bond with France would define his entire life. As a young man, Bokassa joined the French colonial army. He fought in World War II, marched in Paris, and even saw combat in Indochina. He wore the French uniform proudly, and he never stopped calling himself, in his own words, a French soldier above all. But when he returned home, Bokassa wasn't content with medals. He wanted power. On December 31, 1965, Bokassa made his move. While the Central African Republic slept, he staged a coup and overthrew his cousin, President David Dacko. By dawn, the country had a new ruler. And democracy? It was dead. Bokassa wasted no time tightening his grip. He scrapped the constitution and dissolved the National Assembly. His reasoning? He dismissed Parliament as a lifeless organ no longer representing the people. In just a few days, the Central African Republic transformed into a personal dictatorship. By the early 1970s, Bokassa had elevated himself above everyone. He promoted himself to full general in 1971, and in 1972 he declared himself president for life. This wasn't just ego. This was obsession. Bokassa believed ordinary titles were beneath him. President wasn't enough. He saw himself as destined for greatness, a ruler chosen by history itself. And as his grip on power grew, so did his hunger for recognition. Bokassa didn't just want to be feared. He wanted to be worshipped. So, he began preparing for something unthinkable. Not to be president, not even a king, but to become an emperor. And he wasn't doing it alone. Behind the scenes, Bokassa had powerful friends. France. France needed uranium for its nuclear weapons program during the Cold War. Bokassa's country had it. In exchange for steady access to resources, France gave Bokassa money, weapons, and protection. So while his people struggled in poverty, the dictator was building castles in the sky, with France's blessing. This was the beginning of a reign that would spiral into absurdity, cruelty, and bloodshed. From insane laws and moral police to the massacre of schoolchildren, Bokassa's rule would become one of the darkest chapters in African history. But before the world would see his madness in full, it would first witness one of the most outrageous coronations of all time. Crazy, isn't it? A single man's obsession with control could twist an entire nation's future. And the truth is, stories like this aren't rare. History is full of them. If you want more untold stories of power, corruption, and downfall, hit that subscribe button. Because the next one might shock you even more than Bokassa. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And for Jean-Bédel Bokassa, absolute power turned into absolute madness. Once he cemented himself as president for life, Bokassa began ruling his people with laws that were less about order and more about control. He passed a law requiring every man and woman between the ages of 18 and 55 to prove they had a job. If they couldn't, they faced prison or heavy fines. He banned begging outright, as if poverty could be legislated out of existence. He restricted drumming, drumming to weekends and nights only, trying to control even the rhythm of his people's culture. And then he created a so-called morality brigade, enforcers who roamed the capital, Bangui, to monitor bars, nightclubs, and dance halls. His goal? To police morality itself. But his obsession with control didn't stop there. It became deeply personal. Bokassa forced every schoolchild in the Central African Republic to wear uniforms with his face on them. The uniforms had to be purchased from a company owned by one of his many wives. So not only did he turn education into propaganda, he also turned it into profit. And when the children resisted, that's when Bokassa showed the world just how brutal he truly was. In April 1979, thousands of students protested against the expensive uniforms. They refused to wear Bokassa's face on their chests. Bokassa's response was merciless. He ordered mass arrests. Over 100 school children were killed after being detained. Witnesses reported that Bokassa himself participated in the beatings, personally striking students until they were dead. The massacre horrified the world. Rumors even spread that he engaged in cannibalism, though those were never proven. But what was undeniable was this: Bokassa had crossed a line that not even France could ignore. For years, France had protected him. They had propped up his regime in exchange for uranium and diamonds. But after the slaughter of children, the international community turned against him. Even his patron, President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing of France, who had once enjoyed hunting trips with Bokassa, couldn't keep backing him in public. Bokassa had become too toxic. His downfall was near. But before it all came crashing down, he would stage one of the most bizarre and wasteful spectacles in modern history. A coronation so extravagant, so ridiculous, that it bankrupted his nation and shocked the world. Jean-Bédel Bokassa believed he was destined for greatness. But in 1977, he took that belief to its most absurd extreme. On December 4, 1977, Bokassa transformed himself from president for life into Emperor Bokassa, I of the newly declared Central African Empire. The ceremony was modeled after Napoleon's coronation in 1804. But while Napoleon had built his empire through conquest, Bokassa built his through diamonds, uranium, and French money. The price tag? $20 million. That was 1/3 of his nation's entire budget. In today's terms, that's over $100 million blown on a single event, in one of the poorest countries in Africa. And what did the people get in return? Nothing but humiliation. Bokassa imported 60,000 bottles of champagne. He commissioned a $5 million crown, a throne shaped like an eagle, and a golden carriage pulled by 8 white horses flown in from Normandy. France provided cavalry horses, 17 military aircraft, and even Navy personnel to support the orchestra. The entire event lasted 2 days. Bokassa sat on his throne in flowing robes, declaring himself emperor, the last man in history to create a new empire. And while he celebrated with Dom Perignon, his people starved. But Bokassa's empire didn't last. Less than 2 years later, the schoolchildren massacre of 1979 shattered his image beyond repair. By September of that same year, France had finally had enough. While Bokassa was away on a state visit to Libya, French paratroopers launched Operation Barracuda. They stormed the capital, overthrew his government, and reinstated the very president he had toppled in 1965, David Dacko. Bokassa fled first to Ivory Coast, then found asylum in France. The Emperor of Central Africa had become a fugitive. In exile, his life unraveled. In 1980, he was tried in absentia and sentenced to death for the murder of school children and other crimes. But Bokassa wasn't done with his delusions. In 1987, when he finally returned to the Central African Republic, he faced trial again, this time in person. The death sentence was eventually commuted to life imprisonment in solitary confinement. And then, in 1993, he was released. By this time, the once feared emperor had become an old, broken man. He spent his final years insisting he was the 13th apostle of Jesus, even claiming he held secret meetings with the Pope. Jean-Bédel Bokassa died in November 1996. So what do we make of his legacy? Some call him a clown, a man who dressed like Napoleon and wasted his country's future on champagne and diamonds. Others call him a monster, a tyrant who murdered children and ruled with fear. But one thing is certain. Jean-Bédel Bokassa's reign remains one of the most bizarre, brutal, and embarrassing chapters in modern African history. A dictator who crowned himself emperor, only to be remembered as a cautionary tale of power gone mad. His empire crumbled in less than 2 years, but the damage he left behind lasted far longer. And that's the thing about history, it always has another dark story waiting. If you want to uncover them with me, subscribe, leave a comment on what shocked you most, and share this story. Because the more we talk about the past, the more we understand the dangers of repeating it.